Okay. Then I'll continue in light of the last presentation, and I see. Did everybody attend the presentation before about the process, or somebody or just now dropping in? Okay, which is fine. But I'll briefly go over that, and this is a continuation more in depth. As I said, about automated checks before publishing open source code. So what do you do when you have an internal project, you want to make it open source? What kind of checks can you do? And more specifically, what do we do at the Open Source Program Office of Alliander? What kind of checks do we use? So I was supposed to be here with my colleague, Thijs. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it to the conference, so I'll be doing the presentation myself. I work at the Open Source Program Office at Alliander. That's half of my role at Alliander. Also as a technical solution lead in another team. And I have a background in electrical engineering, software development, different roles. And I'm from Alliander. Alliander is a distribution grid operator in the Netherlands for about the third of the Netherlands. So we supply electricity and gas, distribute electricity and gas to about a third of the Netherlands, with quite a large electricity grid and a similar gas grid, which is smaller, but just about as much households. And well, it's about 8,000 employees, which are not just engineers in the field, but also more and more IT people trying to enable the energy transition and also working on open source software projects. And so briefly, what do we do as an open source program office? This was also discussed a bit during keynotes and other presentations. But at Alliander, our main focus, main involvement with open source, I'd say, is still consumption. We knowingly and not knowing it, consume quite a bit of open source software, especially in the IT infrastructure, of course, but also in software development. We do quite a bit of software development in-house, where we use all these different types of libraries. And that means that as an open source program office, we were established at the transition from 2018 to 2019, is that we also are involved with what do we consume in open source software, and what kind of policies do we have with regards to licenses, and educate especially the developers who get the libraries from everywhere to take some aspects into consideration. I just watched the presentation, was two slots before it. Let's see if I can, I know you're in the room. Marius, right? Marius Sheko, yeah. It was a good presentation about all the things about vulnerabilities that might come in the code. How do you maintain dependencies? How do you update them? Really great presentation. So if you're watching this live stream, or go watch it back afterwards, that's something we do as an OSPO. Also, the contribution part, we are involved with some projects, and often we are part of a user of a certain library or ecosystem, and we make some smaller contributions and facilitate that to empower the developers to actually make a pull request and have the legal guarantees that everything is fine. Then the inner source part, which is getting these practices from open source and applying them in your own organization. And we do that more and more, and also as a step in the process, where we have some internal project which we see might be interesting to be open sourced. And especially if it's dedicated for software engineers or data scientists, then we can start building a user base internally and start having multiple people use it. And then at a certain point we know, okay, others can readily adopt this software, then it's ready for prime time. We can make it an open source project. But sometimes projects are only intended for inner source use at a certain point. And then creation, that's what we're going to talk about today, is how do we create a new open source project. As said, can be started through inner source, but how do we create a new open source project? And supporting that. We're not new in this, so this is the history we have of open sourcing projects at Alliander, sort of the main parts. We have quite some number of other open source projects, smaller size, but we started right at the beginning when we had the open source program office and we had our first agreements within the Linux Foundation Energy to get going with collaboration to take one project that was already existing under a different name as an open source project and sort of rebrand it under the Linux Foundation, bring it under the governance of the Linux Foundation, the Grid Exchange Fabric project. And we started together with RTE and other organizations on a Compass project. This was created from scratch. And then later on, and this is where this process is more coming from, we really took existing projects which had a somewhat longer heritage within the organization and make them an open source project. So OpenStaff, for example, had a history of about 7 years within Alliander with plenty of research. So how can we do short-term energy forecasting and taking that project and making sure that it is it is separate from all Alliander-specific infrastructure, specific code, and clean it up and make it available as an open source project. And similar power grid model, for example, also an internal project with quite a history, which first became an inner source project and then eventually an open source project. And so the process and the aspects we check as an OSPO in supporting this open source, open sourcing of code has been refined over the years, and so has the automation. And we'll go through this at a later stage. So these are the aspects or focus areas, I think was just called in the previous presentation, where we check on as an OSPO. And you could see there's some order in this, but it's more as a suggestion. We can start with a general consideration because it often helps to tackle that from the beginning when we have the first discussions with the team about what do you want to do when open sourcing this. Whereas branding and marketing often comes at a bit of a later stage, but all can be worked on pretty much independently. So first, when it comes to general considerations, we have a discussion with the team, like what do you want to do with this project? What is your goals? What do you want to start it, make it open? And sometimes it can be the case that you can actually contribute to an existing project rather than starting your own. What are potential partners you might want to work with? Now, and then also, I'll speed up a bit because of the rest of the presentation. What is the business case? So, open sourcing requires a certain commitment because you can do the initial investment in time, maybe less so in money, to actually clean up the project, add the documentation, think about the governance, go through the legal process, and make the project open. That requires a certain investment, and as Alliander, we mostly seek collaboration. We seek, collaboration. So that means that you want to have sort of a return on investment by getting others to contribute and start a community, which also means that we want a commitment for, say, about 3 years that we can actually get this project off the ground and trying to interest others to get involved. Then we do some legal checks, and I'll show some automation to address that. So, if you have a project, what kind of libraries does it use? Where is it intended to be ending up? What licenses are common there? And to make sure that the license information you put on the project is actually clear to anybody consuming it. So it's clear who is the copyright belong to, and what is the license. And there might be other issues you want to care for, like trademarks, to make sure that's all taken care of. Then the more technical assessment. Is there any secrets, passwords, API keys in the code base, sensitive information? Is the code quality to speed? And to add some basic documentations, and I'll show some automation to help with that. But is there, for example, a security MD, also addressed in the other talk by Marius? But make sure that if somebody finds a security vulnerability, that they can actually have information on how they can contact you as a project. And that's also brings us to the next part, the governance and processes to support the project once it's launched. So where do you communicate as a group? Is there a mailing list? Is there a wiki to have your documentation? All these kinds of things you have to think about and get off the ground. Then actually launch it and get some initial effort off the ground. Make periodic releases, write about the changes you made, put all for example, what we do is from the beginning encourage projects to add an OpenSSF best practices badge, which is a process assignment assessment. Say, are you addressing certain security related issues? So as said, the security MD, does outsiders detecting a vulnerability, do they know how to contact you? Do you have a way to be on top of your dependencies and updating them? These are kind of questions that come in this assessment. And some of them is also how have you configured your version control? Are there any checks with 2 people having to sign off on pull requests? And so it often makes sense to do that only after you actually launch the project. And then all things about branding and marketing, to contact those organizations you're interested in collaborating with, getting a name out there, making sure it looks nice, that you have a good image that people recognize. Things like that. And so going through this process and all these aspects, we have used some tooling, and I'll show you after this, but I'm interested if any of you here have certain tools that you use that might address some of these aspects already. And of course, Marius, you gave a good presentation. So maybe if I ask you first, what do you have suggestions for tools? Yeah, I'll repeat it. We can also maybe get a handheld, but I think for now we're fine. To use the tools that are on your platform, because we're not using bare version control anymore. You have these suites like GitLab and GitHub and others, and use the tools that are in there to, for example, stay on top of dependencies, but they also take care of other parts of this process. So yeah, use those tools. Anybody else have suggestions? What you could think of?
For documentation, I would suggest MKDocs.
Yeah, MKDocs.
It's really great, especially there is something that's called material. It's a team, but they've really done a great job at making it like super easy to configure.
Yeah.
And it's especially nice when there are different repos that have documentation that's embedded in the code, and then you want to have like just one documentation center. And this is quite tricky. It took us quite a lot of time to figure out before finding it.
Agreed. MKDocs. I won't be showing it because I'm focused on checking up front. But we use the MKDocs with the material design in, I think, 2 or 3 of the projects we open sourced, because it's easy to configure, it works very well. And for example, one of the projects, Shapeshifter, which is very much focused on the standard, there's also a plugin to get the PDF export. So this is one of the use cases we had. So it's really good. Good suggestion. Somebody else?
It's not open source tool that we are currently using. We're using JFrog as it's a pretty good play tool to check for vulnerabilities, also licensing.
Yeah, JFrog, the repository, kind of caching your dependencies, right? Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. And in the back? Yeah, or maybe we should get a handheld. I don't know if there's other suggestions, otherwise I'll continue, but yeah. Oh, wait, 1 second, then we get the... All right. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
I guess it's in the ballpark, as this gentleman suggested earlier, to make the community help with this. And then another direction could be to actually, within LF Energy, support projects which are tooling to help organizations do this transformation. I mean, Git was developed to accelerate sharing code in an easy fashion, and if we have to go to conferences every time we want to share knowledge about how we transform our organizations, it's going to be a long process. So we should definitely look for tools and get inspired with how we share code and technology and try to share knowledge in the same way. I guess that's the biggest blocker in my organization, is that nobody knows how to do this and nobody has the right tooling for it. So if we want to make open source technology work, I think we should also focus on building open source tools to make open source work.
Yeah. So what I'll be showing us is our process is a combination of other tools, and it's already on GitHub as an open solution. So in that sense, it's our small contribution, but it's not a community project, or not yet. So, but it would be interesting to collaborate, and yeah, certainly. I recognize the need. Anybody else? Or shall I continue from there? Yeah. Maybe you should just place the handheld on the seat. I think it will be fine. Oh, yeah. Pandoc? Yeah? Yeah.
Thank you. I was... no? Yeah. Something that we use at NSOE, or we're trying to use, is Pandoc for people trying to collaborate with documents in general. So instead of working with Words or in SharePoint, to try to get a more open source approach in that sense.
Yeah. I recognize is one of the recent projects we did was an architecture model, Ability, and then normally you'd expect architects to work in graphical editors, maybe PowerPoint presentations. And now they are expected to work in a way where everything is in version control and through GitHub pull requests, maybe. Yeah. So on the one hand, it's a tooling aspect. How can you facilitate that? Yeah, to enable that. And Pandoc could also be similar to the MKey docs, right?
Indeed,
to make it easy that you make a pull request on documentation, you get a preview to verify your changes. That people less familiar with all the open source aspects because they are not a coder, for example, that they can still follow the same process and can contribute.
Indeed. I think everything is in the document as code movement or philosophy, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then I'll continue, maybe just place it there. With what we did as the OSPO, and I said it's to support this initial process mainly. So you can scan the QR code or go to the URL. This is at least our contribution by making this open. It's we decided on a GitHub Actions workflow to make it easy to run this, because I used to do this on my own laptop in the beginning. Just open a shell, run this command, open a shell, do that command. It's not repeatable. Many different tools, different configuration. And we decided to use the GitHub Actions workflow now that we have it as a prominent way of running jobs within our organization in terms of automation. And in terms of usability, you can just add, it always starts from the main branch, but say you make a change in this process, you can choose a different one. You say what kind of repository you want to check. Currently it's only on GitHub. And maybe if you want to check a specific branch. So what we have, for example, is that projects sometimes they start adding policy documents or cleaning up the code, adding license annotations on a separate branch. So then it's easy to say, okay, just check this branch because that is the one prepared for us to look at as an OSPO. And then on the right, you see all the steps that we do, although these, of course, this is more supportive, generate the software name for the repository, and same as the checkout of the config files. But the other ones with the eyeglass are the checks we'll do, and I'll go over them. And I mean, you can use these tools independently. You can adopt them in your own project. You could take this as inspiration for your own setup. So what do we check? In this case, we do some legal checking, check for license information. So if the copyright and license information is clearly indicated on the project. We do a security check. Now that I think of it, it's more the password stuff. It's not the vulnerabilities in libraries, because we have often different tools, and you could be using the built-in tools like Dependabot and GitHub and others at a later stage. So this is not something we check upfront, but we could. Language use. So we check not just spelling and using active tense, but also is your code having non-inclusive language that you might know of. The code quality, we'll go over that briefly as well, and anything documentation related. And the idea of the checks we use in this pipeline is that we get as much signifiers that there might be something wrong. There's as much alerts. Because we might go over and say, oh, this is not relevant, this is not relevant. Of course, you want to prevent false positives, but it's for us as an OSPO. So we're fine going to the nitty-gritty details. I'd rather have too much feedback that I can know, okay, these are the focus points, than not enough and miss something before making it open source. But that comes down to configuration. So in terms of legal checks, we start with the copyright and license annotation. So you want to have your project to be clear about who's the copyright holder and what is the license. And we consider it best practice to have that on each and every file. So for example, here in the PowerGit model, we have the SPDX file copyright text. Say, okay, the copyright is to the contributors to the PowerGit model project, and the license is the Mozilla Public License 2.0. The more traditional way to do that is to have this whole preamble of, I don't know, about 10 lines. Reuse says, okay, this might be good enough, relying on the SPDX, also one of the Linux Foundation projects, SPDX identifiers to just signify the copyright and the license. And then make sure it is attributed to every file. So if you copy a specific file, then you still know, this is from this project, this is the author, and it applies to this license. And it's not just the repository with a license or license.md and nothing in the files. It's a best practice, and the tool itself, the reuse tool, can not only check, but also can help you add these annotations. And due to user feedback of the projects, we also removed the years in the copyright information. So it's not that you have to update this every year. You can always go back to the Git history. That's the idea, at least, if you want more specific details. But then it's relatively easy to just be more explicit about your copyright and license information. And this is something we ask of our projects, and then it is rather easy to do a check running this tool. And this is an example output where it says, okay, there's some missing copyright and license information. So it expects copyright and license information. Could also be the more explicit preamble. But it's not in this workflow, and it's not in the README. And by the way, this is a summary. So you have some additional work to do, right? And this is something we would action on as an OSPO to say, okay, please add to these files these annotations. Something else, more of a legal check, is, and I saw it on the slide by Marius, the open source software review toolkit. So there's many tools to assess the dependencies of a project, but I've come to find that ORT is oftentimes the best one. So we started using that, and we use it through GitHub Actions. And it is able to resolve package managers of many different languages, and sort of to determine what kind of dependencies are there. And the way it's configured in this GitHub Actions workflow is that you end up with a zip file you can download with the results of the analysis, and you see that on the right. And in it, there's a configuration. So if you go online with this OSPO code scanner workflow, it uses the standard ORT rules. So it says like, oh, watch out, this has copyleft. Hey, this is a commercial license on a library. You might have to address it. So it warns for things you typically want to be warned about. But at Alliander, we also have written our own ORT-specific rules that we can apply doing the analysis. And then you end up with this sort of, so there's many things, right? You get a software bill of materials, and you get some JSON files, but I think the scan report web app, that's amazing, because you get an HTML file with embedded JavaScript, embedded graphics. So it's just one HTML file, which is a single page app. And you can click through it, get, okay, this particular project, it says there's a BSD license for this specific dependency. This is more of a parsing error than anything else, I guess, but it doesn't match to SPDX expression, so make sure that this is fine. In this case, this is a false positive, but it could be that you find, oh, we have a commercial license we have to deal with, or we have some copyleft in a project we intend to license in Apache 2.0. How do we deal with this? Do we swap out the library for something else? Do we change the license of the project itself? And then you can also go down the dependency tree for more insights. I was talking about the security.md, for example. Now, how do you make sure that this is in the file? You can use a repo linter for this. This is a project from the to-do group, also one of the Linux Foundation projects. There's a whole separate branch talking about OSPOs and best practices. But they have the repo linter, and you can set specific rules. There's already some rules provided by the repo linter, and I think if you run it, it also does some basic checks, like do you have a README? But you can configure it to do many things, like look for text in specific files, check if there's, so for example, what we do now is we do a search for best practices badge, OpenSSF best practices badge in the README. Because we expect that our open source project aspire to the OpenSSF best practices badge, and that they put that on the README, so we can look for that. Means if it's not found, might not be an issue, but at least it's a check and something you can check for automatically. And you get an overview of all these different checks. And I said, right, you can check, is there a license file, is there a contributing MD? And it basically spells out everything that might be missing. Then, with regards to security, a big term. So we look for secrets. That's something we do. And we currently use Trufflehog. There's other tools as well, but you just point it to your repository and it's trying to find any API keys that might be there, or secrets or passwords. It looks for certain strings. So it has in it sort of a database of things that might typically look like a secret, and look for that. To add to Marius' previous talk, you can also use built-in tools, right? GitHub has some scanning tools as well, but this works regardless of the project where it's hosted. And then also this was in Marius' talk, the OpenSF scorecard. It's also with regards to security, and this is a sort of a technical assessment about security. So I mentioned the best practices badge. It's something like the process. Do you have your processes in place? And this is very much a technical check. So you can run this on your repository. And there's an example output. And it says, oh, okay, first check binary artifacts, because binary artifacts might be DLLs, EXE files, zip files with malicious content. Could be bad things. It might just be a spreadsheet with nothing nefarious, but it's hard to check and it's something you generally want to avoid. And you can also go to the documentation to read why this is an issue. But you get a score. Okay, 10 out of 10. There's no binaries found. This is good. But you also get like your GitHub configuration. Is there any branch protection that people cannot force push to the main branch or need to do a review of a pull request? And you get feedback on this point. So this is something we added as well to get an insight if there's possible improvement. And something that often comes up here is that the dependencies are not version pinned. And sometimes it's a deliberate decision to say like, okay, we always use the latest version. But for certain things, it might really be good to make an explicit version and update them intentfully. Then something totally different about the language checks. I presented about it this Open Source Summit Europe last year about checking for non-inclusive language. And there's a tool called Woke, which is set up to do that specifically. Like words like a master or excessive use of his and hers, like gendered language. There's quite some things you might want to check for. And it's good to know about them. Sometimes you cannot avoid them, or they are throughout. You're using certain words throughout your code. Then you might say, okay, I will address this at a later stage, especially if it's an API definition, it might be hard to change. I've seen that as well. But at least you want to be notified of that. That's why we have Woke. And last year at the Open Source Summit, I demonstrated a very comprehensive set of rules to check from different sources. And that was compiled and is now in this Woke configuration. So for example, the blacklist, whitelist as well. We get quite a bit of findings of projects depending on how much documentation is there. And something else that was recommended by presenting that was Veil. So Veil is, I think, a better checker, which could do the same thing, checking for non-inclusive language as well. And I could really recommend this tool. And it has in it some packaged rules. So for example, you can run Veil as a checker. It checks grammar, spelling, but can also check for non-inclusive language. And it can provide suggestions, has certain warning levels, and there's packages available based on style guides provided by Microsoft, Red Hat, I think some other big companies which have IT-related style guides, and you can just say, okay, apply these rules to my project. The thing is, we started with woke for just checking with non-inclusive language, and now we have a comprehensive set of rules in that tool. I think it's still a project for a couple of days of work to make sure that we move that over to Veil, and then we can start using that tool for that intended goal as well. But there's at least the Alex package, which already checks for that as well. And this is some example output. So if you have a project and want to keep your documentation in check, you get really a constructive feedback of things to improve upon, right? There's a spelling mistake. Did you really mean foxes? Capitalization, and I think it would be good, especially when we are in the energy sector, when we have a lot of sector-specific words. It might be good to add some list of known words that you don't want to be alerted about. Otherwise, you get quite a number of alerts. Now, these are some tools we use, and we use them sort of at the pre-release stage, right? We work with a project. We go to this process to discuss whether you want to make it an open source process, and additionally, we run this check, this set of checks, to be notified about issues that we might want to address with the project. But you might as well take these tools and apply them once the project is actually released. Put them in your CI pipeline to get feedback on pull requests, or what we might do with an OSPO. We haven't done that as much yet, but we might do that more often, I think, is to do like a periodic check. Do like every year or so, go with the team, run these automated checks and see are there any issues that might arise from the current state of the project. Keep things in check. I think that leads us to the end of the presentation, at least. And we're right on time, but maybe we can. I'm in between you and the coffee, but maybe we can squeeze in a question, if there are any. Yeah. Yep.
Thanks. Hi, Josh here from Pandora. I have a two-part question. I know I'm greedy.
Yeah.
What challenges do you see in implementing this way of working in the monitoring phase? So I thought that was really good that you not only use it for launch, but on every pull request, for example. But do you have this completely automated in your release processes? And do you see challenges there?
I don't need a handout, but yeah, I see challenges. In automating this, because the question is then, when do you want to check what? And when there are newcomers to the project, what feedback do they get? So if somebody says, okay, I just want to make a small contribution, and they get overloaded with all these checks, with legally this is wrong, and you should have written the documentation, the sentences in a different way. They, especially the tools we use in our configuration, they might get a lot of negative feedback without any, thank you for making a contribution. I think about the timing. Maybe when it comes to wording, you might fix it. Of course, you want to address it working on that, but maybe you could also address it in a release. That's a question I had as sort of a challenge. And I think in general, it's easier to adopt these tools in your open source project than it is as an OSPO, because the setup often was very cumbersome, whereas there's often a GitHub action readily available you can use in your project with the configuration. But in this case, I have to check out a project in a different set and have to run the tools sort of locally in the runner. So it was, in terms of automation and configuration, it was more of a struggle to get it working for our use case than it would be if you adopt one of these tools and just take talking GitHub action and apply it on your project.
Okay, and part two, I know I'm greedy. You want to help other DSOs start their own projects because you might see a synergy?
Yeah.
do you use these processes to help them start up their own projects as well?
No, we haven't. We have suggested this setup in an earlier version to the Dutch tax office. So we shared the process and the automated tools to help them set up their internal process. So kickstart, bootstrap their internal process of open sourcing, so that they can get something off the ground as well. And I mean, we can run it on any project, so certainly we could do that. What has been the case is that we have a project in which we are one of the collaborators. This happens especially in research projects, where you have a research institution, we are collaborating there as Alliander, and it's like, okay, we want to make the research an open source project. We can help with running these checks and coming up with some advice on making sure that the license annotation is clear on all the files. Because we have the expertise, and it's really easy to contribute. And I would expect, if you would ask us, we are another organization in the energy space, and we're struggling with this, sure, reach out, and we might be willing to help.
Regarding code style, have you tried only Valet and the other one Walk? But these ones are mostly for spelling and grammar, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Regarding code style, do you have like some recommendations?
We use Sonar Cloud currently for our open source project. We have that enabled, so it's sort of the default. Sonar Cloud or
how do you spell
Sonar
it?
Cube if you want to host it yourself.
SolarCube?
Yeah, but I would say that's not the department of the OSPO to say, okay, you have to use this linter. If you want to use something else, same for code quality checking, I think that's more the technical side of the project to decide upon, whereas these are more the checks where an OSPO would focus on.
Yeah, but it's also from a higher level and from a management perspective, it's also quite hard because sometimes you get like two different offices that must collaborate and that doesn't agree on the rules, and then
yeah,
you have to figure out which style you will apply if you want to have like an overall control over what's going on.
Yeah, then it would be good to maybe address in the project governance, right? To say we format the code this way, and we use these and these checks to make sure the code maintains a good quality. But I personally would say this is not. This is more left to the project.
Okay. Thanks,
Tony.
Yes, so maybe I can comment on the questions you just mentioned about the automatic tooling when we receive contributions, the flow. Sometimes indeed some of the automatic tools can be actually discouraging, I would say, for the new contributors if the checks are too strict, especially on some DCO stuff. But there's one thing is that we as a maintainer, we also have the authority to override the checks. So that's something we sometimes do. So if we, from the human check, this should be okay. So we can bypass the check and then merge the PR pull request. So. Yeah, for example, one of the stuff is the digital signature of the origin of your contribution. That the automatic way is that when you do Git, you have to sign your commit, and the signature of your commit with your email address should be the same email address of your GitHub account. If that doesn't match, it gets rejected by the pipeline, and that's very annoying. We had this before many times. But there's a way to ask the contributor to fix that. It's actually pretty tricky if the contributor are not familiar with advanced Git like force push or reassign a commit or whatever. But what you can do is to ask contributor, can you declare in the PR, I declare all my contribution from myself just by writing this sentence. He did that, and then we merge. We legally acceptable. Yes, that's illegally acceptable. But then we merge the PR bypassing that check. So that's an example.
Good example, thanks. Are there any questions? Otherwise, we'll go for drinks. Oh, sorry.
I would like to,
Yeah.
at the moment, At the moment, we use Azure DevOps for
Yeah.
pipeline configuration. I guess this open source OSPO code scanner won't work out of the shelf. So that, well, my question is, can I use it as is, or I need to do the conversion of the
I'm not
GitLab.
familiar with Azure DevOps.
Yeah.
I've heard it is quite similar to GitHub Actions, but that's what I've heard. But as said, it is pretty much as if these, it's a long list of shell commands, a lot of it. I think the most important one is ORT. ORT is the most specific one, the open source review toolkit to check the dependencies. That's the one I think the most dependent on GitHub Actions as a setup. So that might be the most difficult one to get working. But otherwise, I'd say just go through the workflow, and it's pretty much just shell commands with config. All right. Thank you very much.